Picture this: a foggy London evening, gas lamps casting long shadows on cobblestone streets, and the unmistakable silhouette of a man in a deerstalker hat. For more than a century, Sherlock Holmes has captivated our imaginations. The world's greatest detective, a mind so sharp it could cut through any mystery. But behind every legend stands an equally powerful rival. Someone who doesn't just challenge the hero, but elevates the entire story. We all know the names: Moriarty, Irene Adler, even the lesser-known but formidable figures from the vast Sherlockian universe. But who among them truly deserves the title of Holmes' greatest adversary? Not just the one who outsmarted him in a moment, but the one whose presence shaped him, whose intellect mirrored his own, and whose legacy continues to haunt the pages of Arthur Conan Doyle's timeless stories. This isn't just about picking a villain. It's about understanding what makes a rivalry iconic. Is it sheer cunning, the ability to leave a permanent mark on the hero's journey? Or perhaps it's the adversary who reflects something deeper about Holmes himself, his flaws, his obsessions, even his humanity. We're about to embark on a journey through gaslit alleyways and psychological duels, exploring the minds of those who stood toe-to-toe with the master of deduction. And I promise you, the answer might not be who you expect. So settle in, because today we're not just revisiting old stories, we're digging into the very heart of conflict, legacy, and brilliance. By the time we're done, you'll see Sherlock Holmes and his foes in a whole new light. This is about more than just mystery. It's about what happens when greatness meets its match. To truly understand who rises to the top, we need to define our terms. What does it even mean to be the greatest adversary to a mind like Sherlock Holmes? It's a question that goes far beyond simply being a criminal. A common thief or a one-time murderer wouldn't even register on Holmes' radar, let alone in our discussion. No, the title of greatest demands a multifaceted set of criteria, a benchmark against which every potential candidate must be measured. First and foremost is the intellectual challenge. This is the absolute baseline. A worthy adversary must be a genius in their own right, possessing a mental agility that can, at least for a time, match or even surpass Holmes' own legendary deductive powers. They must be a strategist, playing a game of chess where the pieces are human lives, and the board is all of London. This isn't about brute force. It's about a meeting of two immense intellects, creating a clash that is as thrilling for us to witness as it is terrifying for those caught in the middle. But a sharp mind alone isn't enough. The second criterion is the depth of the personal threat they represent. Does this adversary threaten more than just a client or a case? Do they directly endanger the people Holmes holds dear, like Dr. Watson or Mrs. Hudson? Or more profoundly, do they threaten the very foundations of Holmes' world, his methods, his sanity, or his moral code? The most dangerous villains are those who understand that to defeat Sherlock Holmes, you must attack the man, not just the detective. This leads us directly into the third measure, moral complexity. A purely evil, mustache-twirling villain is simply not interesting enough for Holmes. The most compelling foes live in the grey areas. They often possess a twisted logic or a noble goal pursued by monstrous means, forcing Holmes and us to question our own sense of justice. They hold up a dark mirror to our hero, reflecting a version of himself that chose a different path. And in doing so, they reveal more about Holmes' character than any friend ever could. We must also consider their lasting impact, both within the stories and in our culture. How many times did they cross paths with Holmes? A single encounter can be shocking, but a recurring nemesis weaves their presence into the very fabric of the legend. And finally, Which of these characters broke free from the pages of the Strand magazine to become a cultural icon in their own right? Their names synonymous with villainous genius. This cultural footprint is a powerful testament to their effectiveness as an adversary. By weighing these factors, intellect, personal threat, moral depth, recurring presence, and cultural impact, we create a definitive scale to judge the one true arch nemesis of the great detective. And so, with our criteria set, the conversation almost certainly begins with the man who has become the very definition of a criminal mastermind, the one who has long held the official title of Sherlock Holmes' archenemy, Professor James Moriarty. When most people think of a nemesis for the great detective, this is the name that immediately springs to mind, the shadowy figure who represents the ultimate threat. His introduction in the short story, The Final Problem, is nothing short of spectacular. A moment of high drama where Holmes himself makes the case for this adversary's unparalleled danger. He isn't just another criminal. Holmes describes him as the Napoleon of Crime, a phrase that has echoed through the decades, instantly conveying a sense of strategic brilliance and immense, organized power. Holmes lays out a breathtaking portrait of Moriarty's genius. He's a man with a brain of the first order, a brilliant mathematician who penned a treatise on the binomial theorem that won him acclaim in his youth. But that brilliant mind turned to evil, becoming the central organizer and hidden controller of a vast criminal network that spans London and beyond. Holmes explains that this professor sits motionless at the center of his web, a spider that never needs to leave its lair, yet the web has 1,000 radiations, and he knows every quiver of each one. He is the master planner, the invisible hand behind half the wickedness in the city. Yet he is so clever that he leaves no evidence, his name utterly unknown to the public. This is the core of the threat. Moriarty is a direct intellectual equal, a mind that operates on the same rarefied level as Holmes, but one that is entirely dedicated to the other side of the law. Their conflict is therefore presented as an epic clash of titans, a battle of pure intellect where the stakes are the very safety and order of London itself. This culminates, of course, in their legendary confrontation at the Reichenbach Falls in Switzerland. It is the showdown to end all showdowns, a final, personal meeting between detective and professor, with no allies or weapons other than their wits. The fact that Arthur Conan Doyle chose this moment to seemingly kill off both characters is the ultimate testament to Moriarty's status. Holmes could only be vanquished by a foe of equal, if not greater, power, and the world believed that the two men plunged to their deaths together, locked in a final mortal embrace. Moriarty is the archetype, the blueprint for every criminal mastermind that followed in literature and film. He is the standard against which all others are measured, the first and most obvious answer to our question. But is being the most famous and the most archetypal the same as being the greatest? To answer that, we must look beyond the legend and into the substance of their actual rivalry. Yet for a character of such immense reputation, Moriarty's actual presence in the original canon is astonishingly brief. He appears directly in only one story, The Final Problem, and is mentioned in just one other. This creates a fascinating paradox, a villain whose fame is inversely proportional to his page time. Arthur Conan Doyle essentially created a legend out of whole cloth, providing just enough terrifying description from Holmes's own mouth to make readers believe entirely in this supercriminal's power, without ever needing to show him committing a crime on the page. This was a masterstroke of implication. By having the infallible Sherlock Holmes himself declare Moriarty to be his intellectual equal, Doyle bypassed the need for extensive proof. We believe Moriarty is a genius because Holmes says he is, and that is enough. His power lies not in what we see him do, but in the chilling fear he inspires in the one man we thought was afraid of nothing. This minimalistic origin, however, created a vacuumous silhouette of a villain, waiting to be filled in by the imagination of others. And fill it in they did. Moriarty's true victory was not at Reichenbach, but in his enduring conquest of popular culture. Across the 20th and 21st centuries, he escaped the confines of Doyle's stories to become the default, mandatory villain in nearly every major adaptation. He is the constant in an ever-changing Holmes mythology. In the classic Basil Rathbone films, he is the recurring foe. In Jeremy Brett's definitive television portrayal, his arrival is treated with a gravity usually reserved for world-ending threats. And in modern reinterpretations, he has been reimagined time and again, each version exploring a different facet of his sinister potential. BBC's Sherlock turned him into a chaotic, hyper-intelligent trickster, a digital-age psychopath whose war with Holmes plays out across the London skyline and the internet. In the Robert Downey Jr. films, he is a brutish yet cunning crime lord, weaving a conspiracy that spans continents. Even in shows where he isn't the main villain, his name is invoked as the ultimate standard of evil, the benchmark against which all other criminals are measured. This pervasive influence has solidified his status to the point where he has transcended the source material. For many people, the name Moriarty is now synonymous with criminal mastermind, even if they have never read a single Sherlock Holmes story. He has become an archetype, a narrative shorthand for a villain who is the dark reflection of the hero, proving that his cultural impact is arguably greater than that of any other adversary in the canon. But does this ubiquity and archetypal status automatically crown him as the greatest adversary? Or has his very fame oversimplified what true rivalry means for Sherlock Holmes? Yet for all his towering reputation, there is a compelling counter-argument to be made that Moriarty's status is built more on legend than on substance. If we measure a rivalry by its on-page presence, its tangible impact across the stories, a startling fact emerges. Professor Moriarty is, in essence, a one-off villain. He appears directly in only a single story, The Final Problem, and is mentioned in just one other. His entire criminal empire, the vast web of intrigue that supposedly makes him such a threat, is described to us almost entirely through Holmes's own anxious testimony. We, the readers, are told of his power, but we are almost never shown it. We must take Holmes's word for it that this professor is the puppet master behind every major crime in London, because we rarely see him actually pull the strings. This creates a fascinating dissonance. Moriarty is the archetypal nemesis, yet his rivalry lacks the detailed, multi-layered development we see with other adversaries. There are no long-running cat and mouse games, played out over multiple cases, no series of escalating intellectual duels where we get to study the villain's methods firsthand. Instead, his entire role is to serve as a narrative device for author Arthur Conan Doyle, a deus ex machina of evil, whose primary function was to provide a suitably grand exit for a detective the author had grown tired of writing. The rivalry feels somewhat abstract, a brilliant idea more than a fully fleshed-out conflict. We witness its explosive conclusion at Reichenbach Falls, but we miss the slow burn that should have led to that moment. This reliance on telling rather than showing means Moriarty's intellectual equality is asserted, but not consistently demonstrated through a sustained battle of wits on the page. Compare this to other foes where we sit alongside Holmes as he painstakingly unravels their schemes over the course of an entire story. With Moriarty, the complex scheme is the background, and the story is instead about the final, personal confrontation. His genius is magnificent, but it is a reported genius, a second-hand account of brilliance that we have to accept on faith. This isn't to say he isn't a great villain. He undoubtedly is. But it does raise the question: does the greatest adversary of the world's most detailed-oriented detective truly reside in the shadows of implication? Or should they be someone whose challenge we experience directly, whose mind we see operating in real time, matching Holmes' move for move right before our eyes? This brings us to a figure who represents a completely different kind of challenge, one that proves an adversary doesn't need a vast criminal network to be formidable. In fact, the one who truly defeated Sherlock Holmes wasn't a professor or a kingpin, but a woman, specifically the woman Irene Adler. To dismiss her as merely a potential love interest is to completely miss the profound impact she had on the great detective. Her story, A Scandal in Bohemia, isn't a romance. It's a masterclass in tactical outmaneuvering, where Holmes, for perhaps the first and only time, is not just foiled but outsmarted so thoroughly that he is left with nothing but admiration. The case begins with what seems like a straightforward task for Holmes. The King of Bohemia, a man of immense power and privilege, arrives in disguise at Baker Street in a state of panic. He is engaged to be married to a Scandinavian princess, but a passionate, youthful indiscretion with an American opera singer, Irene Adler, threatens to derail everything. He had given her a compromising photograph of the two of them together, and now, fearing she will use it to create a scandal and ruin his impending marriage, he has tried everything to retrieve it, buying it, stealing it, even having her home ransacked, all to no avail. He hires Holmes to acquire the photograph, confident that the detective's unique skills will succeed where brute force and bribes have failed. Holmes takes the case, viewing it as an intriguing puzzle, a game to be won against a clever but ultimately outclassed opponent. What follows is a brilliant demonstration of Holmes's methodology, at its most creative and elaborate. He doesn't simply pick a lock, he stages an entire theatrical production. After deducing Adler's daily routines and character through his trademark observation, he engineers a crisis. Disguising himself as a drunken, injured clergyman, he stages a fight right outside her home. When her servants rush to break it up, the clergyman is apparently hurt and is carried into her house for aid. Once inside, Holmes uses the commotion to confirm the location of the photograph's hiding place, planning to return later to retrieve it. He even orchestrates a fake fire the next morning, shouting, "Fire," to trick Adler into revealing the secret compartment where she keeps the photograph, believing she would instinctively rush to save her most prized possession from the flames. In any other story, this would be the triumphant climax, the moment where Holmes's ingenious plan proves his superiority. But this is not any other story. Irene Adler does not behave like any other antagonist Holmes has ever faced. She is not fooled for a second. In a stunning reversal, we learn that Adler had seen through Holmes's initial disguise almost immediately. She had recognized him from the moment he entered her home, having been warned by her soon-to-be husband, the King, to beware of the detective's methods. She played along with his entire performance, even his fake fire alarm, all to confirm his intentions. While Holmes was congratulating himself on his success, she was already several moves ahead. By the time he returns to her house with the King, ready to claim his prize, she is gone. She has left England for good, but not before leaving behind a letter for Holmes and a photograph for the King. The letter is a masterpiece of graceful triumph. She explains how she saw through his ruse, compliments his cleverness, and informs him that she has taken the incriminating photo with her, not as blackmail, but as protection against any future action by the King. For the King, she leaves a portrait of herself, a symbol of her independence and a reminder that she has moved on from him entirely. She has not been defeated. She has chosen to leave the game on her own terms, having secured her safety and her freedom. In a single move, she protects herself, neutralizes the threat, and denies both the king and Holmes their objective. It is a complete and utter victory for her. This outcome has a seismic effect on Sherlock Holmes. He is not angry or bitter. He is genuinely impressed. He asks the king for the portrait of Irene Adler as his sole payment for the case, a trophy not of his success, but of his failure at the hands of a worthier intellect. From that day forward, he refers to her almost exclusively as the woman, a title of the highest respect that no one else ever earns. She becomes the standard by which he measures female intelligence and capability. Her victory was so complete because it was multifaceted. She matched Holmes intellectually, anticipating and countering his every move. She challenged him morally, as her motives were not evil but rooted in self-preservation, forcing him to work for a rather unsympathetic client. And most importantly, she defeated him on a personal level, leaving a permanent mark on his ego and earning a unique place in his memory. She proved that beating Sherlock Holmes wasn't about having a bigger army or a higher IQ score. It was about understanding the player better than he understood you. But what truly sets Irene Adler apart and cements her legacy as a unique kind of great adversary is the profound and lasting psychological impact she had on Sherlock Holmes. Her victory wasn't just a professional setback. It was a personal revelation that permanently altered his perception of the world and his place within it. For a man who prided himself on emotional detachment and the supremacy of pure reason, her triumph was a paradox he could never quite resolve, a puzzle he had technically solved, yet still decisively lost. This wasn't a failure he resented. It was one he almost admired, a rare instance where he could appreciate the artistry of his own defeat. Holmes's reaction to the entire affair is utterly unique in the canon. He doesn't express the cold fury he might direct at a common criminal, nor the grim satisfaction of eventually cornering a dangerous foe. Instead, his tone is one of unmistakable, almost reverent respect. By asking for her portrait as his sole fee, he isn't simply acquiring a memento. He is enshrining a benchmark, a permanent reminder that there exists an intellect capable of not only matching his own but surpassing it in a specific, crucial way: understanding human nature. Holmes was a master of deducing facts from evidence: a stray hair, a misplaced walking stick, the tilt of a hat. But Irene Adler was a master of deducing intention from character. She understood the king's fear, she understood Holmes's methodology, and she understood precisely how to use their own assumptions against them. She beat him not by being a better logician, but by being a better psychologist. This is why she earns the singular title of the woman. It is a designation of supreme distinction, a title that separates her from every other person Holmes ever encounters, man or woman. It signifies that she exists in a category of her own, a one-of-a-kind phenomenon that his carefully ordered mental filing system cannot easily classify. She becomes a permanent fixture in his mind, a reference point for brilliance that operates outside his own framework. This lasting impact is the hallmark of a truly great adversary. Moriarty might have threatened Holmes's life, but Irene Adler threatened his worldview. She proves that cold logic could be outmaneuvered by warm cunning, that a well-played emotional gambit could trump a flawless deductive chain. In doing so, she became a different kind of nemesis altogether. She wasn't an enemy to be captured or destroyed. She was a lesson to be remembered. Her greatness lies not in a recurring conflict, but in a singular, perfect victory that continued to resonate through every subsequent case Holmes would take. She was the one who got away, and Holmes was a better detective for it, forever aware that the human heart could be the most unpredictable and powerful variable in any equation. Yet the shadow of Moriarty's empire did not vanish with his fall from the Reichenbach Falls. A criminal network that's sophisticated and far-reaching does not simply dissolve upon the death of its leader. It requires a successor, someone with the skill and the cold-blooded resolve to carry on its legacy. That man was Colonel Sebastian Moran, and his introduction in The Adventure of the Empty House serves as a chilling reminder that the greatest threat often has a contingency plan. If Moriarty was the brilliant, calculating brain of the organization, then Moran was its powerful, ruthless fist, a physical instrument of vengeance and continuing criminal enterprise. We meet Colonel Moran not as a shadowy figure in the background, but as an active, present, and terrifyingly skilled assassin. His profile is that of the ultimate hunter, a man whose entire life has been a training ground for violence. A decorated soldier who served with distinction in the British Indian Army, Moran was a legendary big game hunter, celebrated for his almost supernatural patience and his uncanny accuracy with an elephant rifle. He is the author of the definitive text, Heavy Game of the Western Himalayas, a book so authoritative that even Dr. Watson is familiar with it. This established expertise is crucial. It isn't just that Moran is a good shot, but that he is arguably the finest marksman in the entire canon. A man who has spent a lifetime studying the patterns and behaviors of his prey to make the perfect kill. This background makes him uniquely qualified for his new role as the organization's chief enforcer and assassin. He isn't a common thug, he is a craftsman of death, applying the disciplined skills of a military hunter to the urban jungle of London. Holmes reveals that after his return from the dead, he dedicated himself to dismantling the remnants of Moriarty's web. And one thread kept leading back to this one, remarkably dangerous man. Moran had become the de facto head of the operation, but his motive was not merely greed or power. It was a very personal vendetta. He had been Moriarty's most trusted lieutenant, his chief of staff, and he blamed Holmes not only for the death of his leader, but for the utter ruin of his own lucrative and powerful position. His mission, therefore, was twofold: to continue the criminal work and to personally avenge his fallen commander by executing the detective he held responsible. This personal stake elevates him beyond a mere hired gun. He is a foe driven by a potent mix of professional obligation and bitter personal hatred. The plot of The Empty House revolves around Moran's specific attempt on Holmes's life, a scheme that demonstrates his chilling methodology. Having deduced that Holmes has returned to London, Moran does not confront him directly. Instead, he employs his signature weapon, a powerful air rifle, specially designed to fire revolver bullets with virtually no sound. He then uses the empty house opposite 221B Baker Street as his blind, a hunter's perch from which he can observe his quarry and take his shot with impunity. His plan is fiendishly clever, relying on his knowledge of Holmes's habits. He knows the detective will inevitably come to the window of his sitting room to study the street, and he waits with infinite patience for that perfect moment to strike. It is a plan that perfectly mirrors his big game hunting past. Find a superior vantage point, understand the target's behavior, and eliminate it with a single, silent, long-distance shot. This isn't a crime of passion. It is a calculated execution, the work of a master. What makes Colonel Moran such a compelling and formidable adversary is that he represents a different category of threat altogether. While Moriarty challenged Holmes's intellect, and Irene Adler challenged his perceptions, Moran presents a pure, unadulterated physical danger. He is the embodiment of violent, professional efficiency. His existence proves that the Moriarty organization was not just a collection of clever plans on paper, but a machine capable of lethal action, even after its original architect was gone. He is the continuation of the Moriarty legacy in a very tangible sense, the living proof that cutting off the head of the snake did not kill the body. Holmes himself acknowledges Moran's unique prowess, describing him as the second most dangerous man in London and his own most immediate personal threat. In the end, Moran is captured not in a battle of wits, but through an elaborate trap, a wax bust of Holmes placed in the window to draw his fire, allowing the real detective and Watson to catch him in the act. His capture is significant because it symbolically represents the final closing of the Moriarty chapter. With the brain and the right hand both neutralized, the organization is truly finished. Colonel Moran stands as a testament to the fact that in the world of Sherlock Holmes, a brilliant mind is only ever one silent, well-aimed shot away from being permanently silenced. But if Colonel Moran represents the physical continuation of Moriarty's legacy, then our next contender represents a corruption of an entirely different kind, a villainy that is perhaps more repulsive because it operates not in the shadows of the criminal underworld, but in the cold, clear light of the law. This brings us to a man so utterly loathsome that Holmes himself declares him to be the worst man in London, a title earned not through murder or grand theft, but through a calculated, soul-crushing form of psychological torture, the blackmailer Charles Augustus Milverton. Milverton is a unique and revolting specimen in Holmes's rogues gallery. He is not a brilliant professor or a master assassin. He is a vulture, a parasite who preys upon the secrets and vulnerabilities of high society. His entire enterprise is built on a foundation of legalized extortion. He meticulously collects scandalous letters, compromising photographs, and whispered confidences, not to commit a crime in the traditional sense, but to threaten to reveal them, ruining lives and reputations unless he is paid a hefty sum. What makes him so uniquely detestable, and such a different kind of adversary, is that he hides behind the very rules of civilized society. He is a businessman of sorts, with a wealthy clientele and a meticulous filing system for his stolen secrets. His crimes are almost impossible to prosecute because the act of threatening to reveal a truth is not, in itself, illegal. He operates in a gray area where the law is powerless, forcing his victims to choose between financial ruin and social annihilation. This legal armor makes him a far more frustrating foe for Holmes than any outright criminal. The detective cannot simply gather evidence and have him arrested. The system is designed to protect a man like Milverton. Holmes is therefore forced into a moral quandary. In The Adventure of Charles Augustus Milverton, we see the great detective, the man who so often represents a cold, unwavering sense of justice, decide that the law is an insufficient tool for dealing with such a monster. He and Watson ultimately take matters into their own hands, committing a burglary to steal Milverton's entire stock of incriminating documents before he can use them. This is a staggering departure from Holmes's usual methods. They don their disguises and break into his house under the cover of night, becoming criminals themselves to achieve a greater good. The story reaches its climax not with an arrest, but with an act of brutal vigilante justice. As Holmes and Watson watch from the shadows of Milverton's study, another one of his victims, a noblewoman whose life he had destroyed, enters and shoots the blackmailer dead. They allow her to escape and then proceed with their original plan, burning the entire collection of secrets in Milverton's fireplace, ensuring his vile trade dies with him. This conclusion is deeply symbolic. Society's laws could not touch Milverton, so a personal, moral code had to prevail. Holmes's role here is not as an agent of the law, but as an agent of a higher, more personal sense of justice. He doesn't just outsmart Milverton. He actively participates in dismantling his entire operation through outright illegality, an action he would never contemplate against a foe like Moriarty. This is what makes Charles Augustus Milverton such a profound and memorable adversary. He is repulsive on a personal, human level. His evil is not grand or theatrical. It is small, mean, and venal. He forces Holmes to confront the limitations of his own profession, and to step outside the very legal system he so often upholds. In doing so, Milverton holds up a dark mirror to society itself, revealing how its rules can be twisted to protect the wicked and punish the innocent. He is the embodiment of a different kind of threat, not a criminal genius who challenges the mind, nor a physical danger who threatens the body, but a moral cancer that threatens the very soul of the community Holmes is sworn to protect. And yet, for all the human cunning we've explored, perhaps the most pervasive and terrifying adversary Sherlock Holmes ever faced was not a person at all, but a legend, a creature of folklore, fear, and the fog-shrouded moors. In The Hound of the Baskervilles, the antagonist is a spectral beast, a demon dog of supernatural origin, said to haunt and hunt the Baskerville family for a centuries-old sin. This case is unique in the entire canon because the primary foe is an idea, the pervasive and paralyzing belief in the supernatural. And Holmes's greatest battle is not against a criminal's mind, but against the primal, superstitious fear that lives in every human heart. The genius of this adversary lies in its intangible nature. You cannot arrest a ghost. You cannot outreason a superstition with pure logic alone, because faith and fear operate on a different frequency than deduction. The Hound represents the unknown, the ancient, and the inexplicable forces that the supremely rational world of Sherlock Holmes is explicitly designed to dismantle. The entire case is a direct assault on his core philosophy, that for every effect there is a logical, observable cause. The legend of the Hound, with its glowing jaws and hellish howl, is a challenge to that very foundation. It forces Holmes to confront a problem where the evidence, as presented by terrified witnesses, seems to point towards something beyond rational comprehension. His client, Sir Henry Baskerville, isn't just afraid of a murderer. He is psychologically besieged by a family curse, a fate he believes is inescapable. This is what makes the Hound such a brilliantly effective antagonist. Its power is amplified by its setting. The gloomy, treacherous Grimpen Mire and the desolate Dartmoor landscape are characters in themselves, a perfect breeding ground for dread. Every strange sound in the night, every shadow in the fog, feeds the legend and weakens rational resolve. The environment becomes a weapon in the hands of the true villain, who is, of course, using the myth as a smokescreen for a very earthly crime. But in the minds of the locals, and even the stalwart Dr. Watson, who is sent ahead to investigate, the possibility of the supernatural feels terrifyingly real. Watson, a man of science and medicine, finds himself unsettled by the lonely moors and the chilling stories, demonstrating just how potent this non-human adversary truly is. It preys on vulnerability and isolation, turning the landscape and the very air into agents of fear. Holmes's ultimate victory, therefore, is one of his most satisfying. By applying his meticulous methods to this Gothic horror story, he doesn't just solve a murder. He reaffirms the power of reason in a world still shrouded in shadows and old fears. The revelation that the Hound is a real, physical dog, a massive, savage mastiff, painted with phosphorescent compound to give it a ghostly glow, is a masterstroke. It is the perfect symbol of Holmes's worldview, that behind every monstrous apparition, there is a man with a motive and a method. The supernatural explanation is peeled away to reveal a crude, yet devastatingly effective, mechanical trick. The antagonist was never the animal itself, but the clever human who weaponized a legend, and the deep-seated fear he exploited. In this way, the Hound earns its place as one of Holmes's greatest adversaries precisely because it is not human. It represents a fundamental challenge to his entire existence. To defeat it, Holmes had to validate the fears of his client enough to understand them, while simultaneously holding fast to his conviction that a rational answer existed. He had to battle a ghost story and win, proving that even the most haunting of legends could not withstand the brilliant, unforgiving light of logic. And so we come to the human architect of this nightmare, the man who took a family legend and turned it into a murder weapon. The Phantom Hound was merely the terrifying instrument. The real monster was its master, the seemingly benign naturalist, Jack Stapleton. His brilliance lies in the chillingly methodical way he weaponized every aspect of his environment and his own biography to execute a plan of Gothic horror, making him one of the most cunning and personally invested villains Holmes ever unmasked. Stapleton's first layer of deception is his carefully constructed persona. When we first meet him, he is presented as a harmless, slightly eccentric man of science, living a simple life on the moor with his sister, collecting butterflies and studying the natural world. This disguise is absolutely perfect. It makes him appear completely non-threatening, a curious academic rather than a calculating murderer. He uses this identity to befriend both Sir Charles Baskerville and later Sir Henry, offering concern and local knowledge while secretly gathering intelligence and guiding them right into the path of his engineered terror. His knowledge of the moor is not just scholarly, it is tactical. He understands the Grimpen Mire like a general knows a battlefield, using its treacherous, boggy terrain as a natural prison and a perfect place to conceal his monstrous hound. He doesn't just live on the moor, he commandeers it, turning the very landscape into an accomplice for his crimes. But his most sinister innovation is the perversion of his scientific expertise. Jack Stapleton isn't just a casual observer of nature. He is a skilled naturalist who twists his knowledge for pure evil. His understanding of animal behavior and physiology allows him to create the perfect beast for the job. He doesn't simply acquire a large, fierce dog. He specifically acquires a giant, savage mastiff, a creature of immense physical power. Then he goes much further, applying a ghastly, pseudo-scientific twist. By painting the animal's jaws and body with a phosphorescent compound, he transforms a natural predator into a supernatural apparition. This act is a stroke of diabolical genius. It directly preys on the deepest fears of his target, ensuring that any witness to the Hound would be so paralyzed by terror that they would be unable to respond logically. He used science not to enlighten, but to terrify, creating a psychological weapon that was far more effective than any mere knife or gun could ever be. Yet what truly elevates Stapleton's villainy beyond a simple plot for inheritance is the shocking revelation of his personal connection. He isn't some outside opportunist. He is a Baskerville himself. We learn that his real name is Roger Baskerville, the son of Sir Charles's younger brother. This makes his quest to murder his way to the family title an estate a deeply personal and vengeful campaign. He is driven by a sense of twisted entitlement, a belief that the wealth and status that should have been his father's, and by extension, his, were unjustly denied. This personal stake adds a layer of bitter passion to his calculated cruelty. He isn't just killing strangers for money, he is exterminating his own family out of a warped sense of reclaiming his birthright. This familial connection makes his betrayal all the more profound and his actions all the more heinous. In the end, Jack Stapleton represents a classic, yet exceptionally well executed, type of villain. He is the embodiment of greed and ambition disguised behind a mask of gentle intellect. His plan is a masterpiece of Gothic fiction, combining a familial curse, a terrifying monster, a desolate setting, and a hidden identity. While he lacks the cerebral grandeur of a Moriarty, his evil is more visceral and immediate. He is a hands-on killer. A puppeteer WHO Chinese letter gets his hands dirty, ultimately meeting a fittingly Gothic end by being swallowed by the very mire he sought to control. Stapleton proves that a great adversary doesn't always need to be a criminal genius on a global scale. Sometimes the most terrifying villain is the one who knows your family history, smiles to your face, and waits for you in the fog with a monster he created just for you. But what if the ultimate intellectual challenge to Sherlock Holmes was not a criminal lurking in the shadows of London, but a man sitting in a comfortable armchair in a private club, just a short walk from Baker Street? This brings us to a figure who presents the most complex and fascinating adversarial relationship in the entire canon, precisely because it is not based on malice, but on a fundamental philosophical divide. We are, of course, talking about Sherlock's own older brother, Mycroft Holmes. On the surface, he is an ally, an occasional consultant, and a vital source of government information. But if we look closer, a more intricate and tense dynamic emerges, one that positions Mycroft not just as a sibling, but as a unique kind of rival, the one who chose a different path to power. The first and most startling fact about Mycroft is his intellect. In The Greek Interpreter, Sherlock Holmes makes a breathtaking admission to Dr. Watson, one he would never make about Moriarty or any other foe. He states plainly that in sheer deductive reasoning and analytical power, Mycroft is his superior. Sherlock acknowledges that if the art of deduction began and ended in armchair theorizing, Mycroft would be the greatest detective in the world. This is a monumental concession from a man defined by his own supreme intelligence. Where Sherlock possesses the energy and the drive to run down leads, gather evidence, and confront criminals in the street, Mycroft possesses the raw, untethered brainpower. He is the pure, unadulterated engine of logic, while Sherlock is the engine coupled to the wheels of action. This creates an immediate and unspoken tension. The little brother who is celebrated worldwide for his genius must live in the shadow of knowing there is one man, related by blood, whose mental machinery is even more refined than his own. Their differences, however, extend far beyond mere brainpower into the realm of purpose and philosophy. Mycroft's role is as enigmatic as it is powerful. He is described as being the British government, or at least its most indispensable part. He is a human clearinghouse for information, a synthesizer of data on a national scale. His position requires him to sit at the center of a vast web of intelligence, absorbing all strands and seeing the entire picture without ever needing to leave the Diogenes Club. This is where the brothers' paths dramatically diverge. Sherlock's mission is active justice. He intervenes to right a single wrong, to solve a specific puzzle, to bring a lone criminal to account. His work is personal, immediate, and tangible. Mycroft's mission, by contrast, is passive statecraft. His goal is not justice in the individual sense, but stability and order on a national and imperial scale. He deals in the abstract, weighing lives and outcomes on a grand geopolitical scale. A decision that might sacrifice one innocent person to save 1,000, or allow a small crime to proceed to prevent a larger diplomatic incident, would be a logical calculation for Mycroft. For Sherlock, such a cold equation would be an unacceptable moral compromise. This fundamental difference in purpose makes them adversaries in spirit. Sherlock is the champion of the individual case, while Mycroft is the guardian of the systemic whole. Their occasional collaboration is often tinged with this unspoken conflict, with Sherlock pursuing truth and Mycroft managing consequences. This dynamic casts Mycroft in a uniquely ambiguous light. He is never the villain, but he often functions as an obstruction or a complicating factor. He withholds information for reasons of state security that Sherlock needs to solve a case. He represents a world of bureaucracy and cold, hard realpolitik that stands in stark opposition to Sherlock's more romantic, if equally logical, pursuit of truth. In this sense, Mycroft is the adversary of Sherlock's methods. He is the embodiment of the establishment that sometimes must be circumvented or outmaneuvered to achieve a more personal sense of justice. He is the living proof that a superior intellect, when placed in the service of a vast, impersonal system, can become an indirect opponent to the very concept of individual righteousness that Sherlock Holmes represents. Their rivalry is not one of good versus evil, but of micro versus macro, the heart versus the machine. The detective versus the government he sometimes serves, but whose limitations he must constantly transcend. Yet for all these brilliant criminal masterminds and personal rivals, perhaps the most consistent and frustrating adversary Sherlock Holmes faced was not an individual, but an institution. The very system designed to uphold justice often became its greatest obstacle, embodied by the well-meaning but perpetually outmatched detectives of Scotland Yard, with Inspector Lestrade as their most famous representative. These men were not evil. They were simply inadequate, and THEIR Chinese letter methods and institutional thinking created a persistent systemic barrier that Holmes had to battle on nearly every case, making them unofficial adversaries to true justice itself. The relationship between Holmes and the Yard is a complex dance of respect and profound frustration. Inspectors like Lestrade, Gregson, and Bradstreet are not portrayed as fools. Holmes himself acknowledges they are the pick of a bad lot, capable, energetic, and tenacious police officers, but their capabilities exist within a rigid framework. They are bound by procedure, by rules of evidence, and by a conventional way of thinking that is utterly ill-equipped to deal with the extraordinary criminal minds that Holmes attracts. Their approach is to find the most obvious suspect, and then look for evidence to confirm that suspicion, a method Holmes derides as putting the cart before the horse. He, by contrast, observes all the facts first, no matter how trivial, and allows the resulting analysis to lead him irrevocably to the truth, no matter how improbable it first appears. This fundamental difference in methodology means the Yard is always playing checkers, while Holmes is playing three-dimensional chess. This institutional incompetence manifests not as malice, but as a constant source of friction and danger. Time and again, we see Lestrade arrive at a crime scene, announce he has already solved the case based on the most superficial evidence, and prepare to arrest the wrong person. This creates a race against time for Holmes, who must not only find the real culprit, but often must do so before the bumbling official investigation ruins the evidence, jails an innocent person, or alerts the actual criminal to their presence. The Yard's presence often forces Holmes to work around them, gathering his own proof in secret before finally revealing it in a dramatic courtroom-style summation that leaves the professional inspectors stunned and grateful to take the credit. In this way, the system doesn't just hinder Holmes. It actively empowers the criminals he pursues, providing them with a shield of official misunderstanding behind which they can operate. The true danger of this dynamic is that it forces Holmes to exist as a perpetual outsider. An amateur operating outside the official channels he often cannot trust. He must bypass the very authorities he is ultimately helping, because to work within their system would mean to fail. This paints a rather bleak picture of justice, suggesting that the institution tasked with its delivery is incapable of achieving it without the intervention of a brilliant, unaffiliated mind. The greatest adversary, then, is not always a person, but sometimes the comforting illusion of order and competence. The bumbling yard inspector is a far more relatable, and in some ways more terrifying villain than a criminal genius, because he represents a failure that is systemic, common, and happening right out in the open, dressed in a uniform and carrying a badge. Holmes's battle is not just against crime, but against the complacency that allows it to flourish under the very nose of the law. But if Moriarty represents organized intellectual evil, and Milverton embodies legalized extortion, then our next contender offers a chilling blend of both, wrapped in the refined package of high society. We now turn to a villain who is perhaps the most purely and unapologetically evil in the entire canon. A man whose monstrous nature is hidden not in the shadows of the criminal underworld, but behind the glittering facade of wealth, art, and aristocracy. Baron Adelbert Gruner from The Illustrious Client. Baron Gruner is a different breed of monster altogether. He isn't a scheming professor or a vengeful heir. He is a sadist of the highest order, a man who derives profound pleasure from the psychological and physical destruction of others, particularly women. His crimes are not means to an end, like wealth or power. They are the end itself. His motive is the enjoyment of corruption and cruelty. We learn that his history is a trail of ruined lives, of women he has courted, manipulated, and then brutally discarded once he grew bored of them. One of these former victims he drove to suicide, a fact he recounts with a cold, detached amusement that chills even the normally unflappable Sherlock Holmes. This is not a man with a twisted moral code. He is a man with no morals whatsoever, a pure psychopath operating from within a gilded cage. What makes Baron Gruner so uniquely dangerous and formidable is his impeccable disguise. He is the epitome of the cultured gentleman. He is wealthy, widely traveled, and a renowned connoisseur of Chinese pottery, building an entire museum to house his collection. This cultivated exterior is his primary weapon. It grants him unquestioned entry into the highest social circles, and provides a perfect smokescreen for his vile nature. A common thug or a brutish criminal would be easily identified and ostracized, but a handsome, charming baron with exquisite taste, he is above suspicion. He uses his sophistication and status as a shield, allowing him to prey upon his victims with impunity, as their families and society itself would never believe such a pillar of the community capable of such darkness. His mind is as sharp as his manners are polished, making him a cunning and observant adversary, fully aware of his own reputation and how to manipulate it. This brings us to the heart of the case, and the reason Holmes becomes involved. Gruner has set his sights on his next victim, the beautiful, innocent, and utterly infatuated Miss Violet de Merville. Despite the warnings from her family and the terrifying evidence of Gruner's past provided by her former governess, Miss Winter, Violet is completely under his spell. She sees only the charming baron, refusing to believe the monster that lies beneath. Her father, General de Merville, is powerless to stop the engagement, leading the family to seek the most unusual of clients, none other than the King of Bohemia himself, who, still smarting from his own encounter with Irene Adler, acts as an intermediary. This becomes the illustrious client of the title, a figure so powerful that even Holmes feels compelled to take the case, though the king himself has no personal stake other than a desire to see justice served. The mission to save Violet de Merville forces Holmes to operate in a way he rarely does. He cannot simply gather evidence for the police. Gruner is too clever, too well connected, and his past crimes are too difficult to prove in a court of law. Holmes must therefore wage a psychological war. His goal is not to arrest Gruner, but to break his hypnotic hold on Violet by shattering the charming image he presents to the world. To do this, Holmes must step far outside his comfort zone, employing methods that are uncharacteristically personal and manipulative. He first attempts to reason with Violet directly, a tactic that fails utterly against her blind devotion. He then devises a more daring plan. He must gain access to Gruner's most private possession, a meticulously detailed diary he keeps that chronicles all of his vile seductions and cruelties. This book is the key to proving his true character. The acquisition of this diary leads to one of the most dramatic and violent confrontations in the entire Holmes canon. Watson, acting on Holmes's instructions, is sent to Baron Gruner's home under the guise of a knowledgeable collector interested in his pottery. His real mission is to locate and secure the diary. The plan goes awry, and Watson finds himself in a physical altercation with the Baron, who is far from a feeble aristocrat. In the struggle, Watson seizes a poker from the fireplace and defends himself, ultimately striking Gruner and fleeing with the incriminating book. This act of sheer desperation, with the good doctor becoming an unlikely action hero, underscores the extreme danger Gruner represents. He is not a foe who can be out-thought alone. He must be confronted with force. The story's conclusion is one of the most satisfying examples of poetic justice Holmes ever engineers. While Watson's bravery secured the diary, it is Miss Winter, the former governess, and one of Gruner's earliest victims, who delivers the final blow. Disguised as a terrified messenger, she gains access to the Baron's hospital room where he is recovering from his encounter with Watson. As she leans in, pretending to deliver a secret message, she throws vitriol-concentrated acid into his face, permanently disfiguring him. This brutal act, while technically a crime, is presented not as a villainous deed, but as a long-awaited act of retribution. The beautiful, vain Baron is now a hideous monster on the outside to match the monster within. When Violet de Merville finally sees him in this state, the spell is instantly broken. The charming facade is gone, replaced by the horrifying reality, and she is freed from his influence. Holmes allows this outcome to stand, revealing his own moral flexibility when facing a truly irredeemable evil. Baron Gruner stands as a testament to the fact that sometimes the most dangerous evil does not lurk in the foggy alleyways of London, but smiles at you from across a crowded ballroom, its hands stained not with dirt, but with the finest porcelain. Yet for all the barons and professors, for all the masterminds who operated on a grand scale, one of the most brilliantly audacious schemes Sherlock Holmes ever thwarted was the brainchild of a far more relatable kind of criminal. He didn't command a continent-spanning network or haunt the halls of aristocracy. He was a young, ambitious man of considerable talent who simply decided that a life of crime was a faster route to the wealth and status he felt he deserved. This brings us to the ingenious and utterly captivating John Clay, the mastermind behind the bizarre affair known as the Red-Headed League. The case begins with one of the most peculiar premises in the entire Holmes canon. A pawnbroker named Jabez Wilson arrives at 221B Baker Street in a state of confused agitation. He explains that, thanks to his vibrant red hair, he was hired for a uniquely lucrative and absurdly simple job by an organization calling itself the Red-Headed League. His entire employment consisted of showing up at a specified office for 4 hours a day to copy out entries from the Encyclopedia Britannica by hand. He was paid handsomely for this pointless task, until one day he arrived to find the League had been dissolved and the office vacant. He is left baffled and out of a job, seeking an explanation for what seems like a nonsensical prank. To any other observer, it would appear as a strange, victimless joke. But to the mind of Sherlock Holmes, the sheer absurdity of the situation is a glaring signal that something far more sinister is at work. He immediately recognizes that such an elaborate and expensive ruse could only be a smokescreen for a much more ambitious criminal endeavor. The true genius of the scheme is revealed to be the work of John Clay, a man Holmes immediately identifies as one of the most promising criminals in London. Clay is not your typical thug. He is a university graduate and the grandson of a royal duke, a man who possesses all the education and breeding of the upper class, but has chosen to apply his considerable gifts entirely to a life of crime. Holmes describes him as a murderer, thief, smasher, and forger. A man who is young yet already at the head of his profession, with a brain that is as cunning as it is cold-blooded. What makes Clay so dangerous is his audacity and his understanding of human psychology. His plan to rob the city and suburban bank was not a simple smash and grab. It was a masterpiece of misdirection and patience. He first needed to get the proprietor of the shop next to the bank, Jabez Wilson, out of the way for several hours each day. So he invented the entire Red-Headed League charade, spending a significant amount of money to create a completely believable fictional organization, all just to ensure that a single pawnbroker would be reliably absent from his premises during banking hours. While Wilson was diligently copying encyclopedias, believing he had stumbled upon the easiest job in the world, Clay and his accomplice were in the cellar of the pawnshop, quietly and patiently digging a tunnel straight into the vault of the adjacent bank. The sheer scale of the operation is breathtaking. This was not a crime of impulse. It was a long-term engineering project requiring meticulous planning, excavation, and silence. It represents a new kind of criminal enterprise, one that relies on intellect and innovation rather than brute force. The Red-Headed League itself was a work of art, a perfectly crafted lie designed to exploit a very specific human vanity, Wilson's pride in his red hair, and use it to make him an unwitting and paid participant in his own victimization. The plan was so elaborate, so perfectly executed, that it would have succeeded against almost any other detective. Holmes's admiration for Clay's intellect is palpable, and it speaks volumes about the criminal's capabilities. Upon capturing him, Holmes doesn't express anger or contempt. He offers a compliment, saying, "You are a clever fellow. I have not the slightest doubt that you have worked out every detail of that interesting plot." This acknowledgement from the great detective is a rare honor. John Clay represents a new breed of adversary Holmes would face with increasing frequency as the century turned: the educated, ambitious, and highly skilled professional criminal. He is a symbol of social mobility, but in the wrong direction. A man who saw the rigid class structure of Victorian England and decided that if the doors to wealth and influence wouldn't open for him through conventional means, he would simply pick the lock. His defeat is a triumph for Holmes, but it also serves as a warning. The future of crime would not be led by brutish highwaymen, but by men like Clay, clever, patient, and utterly ruthless in their pursuit of a profit. But the danger was not confined to the drawing rooms of the aristocracy or the foggy banks of the Thames. Sometimes the most terrifying evil was not an abstract criminal network, but a very immediate and domestic threat, residing behind the locked doors of a decaying country estate. This brings us to a villain who stands apart for the sheer, visceral horror he embodies: the murderous stepfather, Dr. Grimesby Roylott of Stoke, Moran. Unlike the calculating Moriarty or the sophisticated Guyuna, Roylott is a force of pure, brutish nature. His menace is not intellectual but physical and psychological. a storm of violence contained within the walls of his own home. From the moment we meet him, he is established as a figure of almost mythological terror. He bursts into the Baker Street sitting room, a giant of a man with a face etched by 1,000 suns and 1,000 rages, framed by deep-set, bile-filled eyes and a high, fleshless nose that gave him the resemblance of a fierce old bird of prey. He is not just angry. He is incandescent with rage. His hands still curved into the shape of the poker, he has just bent into a curve against the fire irons in a fit of strength and fury. This is not a man who plots. He dominates through intimidation, a domestic tyrant whose word is law and whose anger is a tangible, destructive force. His past only deepens the aura of danger. A former planter in Calcutta, he served a lengthy sentence in prison for beating his native butler to death in a fit of rage. This history is crucial. It tells us that his capacity for murder is not theoretical, but proven. An act of brutal violence that stemmed from his own uncontrollable temper. He is a man who has already crossed the ultimate line and has the strength and will to do so again. He returned to England with a fortune, a stepfather to 2 young girls, and a legacy of violence that he brought home like a cursed heirloom. His domain, Stoke Moran, is a physical manifestation of his character. A once great estate now fallen into disrepair, with one wing collapsed and the other barely habitable. A perfect symbol of a noble lineage, corrupted and crumbling from within. The threat he poses is uniquely personal and horrifying because his victims are not strangers or rivals. They are his own stepdaughters, the twins Helen and Julia Stoner. Their mothers will left a substantial income to them, which would revert to Roylott upon their marriages. Their very lives, and their potential for future happiness, became a direct financial obstacle to him. This motive transforms him from a generally violent man into a specific, calculated predator. He wasn't just a brute, he was a murderer hiding behind the legal authority of a patriarch, using his position to isolate and terrify his prey until the moment was right to strike. His method of murder is what elevates him from a mere wife-beater to one of Holmes's most memorably monstrous adversaries. It demonstrates a chilling blend of his brutal nature and his specialized knowledge. As a doctor who practiced extensively in India, he had access to exotic and deadly tools unknown to the English justice system. He didn't choose a knife or a gun, he chose a swamp adder, the deadliest snake in India. This was a weapon that was untraceable, deniable, and left behind a mark, a speckled band that no English coroner could possibly identify. He trained the creature to respond to a whistle, sending it through a ventilator and down a dummy bell pulled directly onto his victim's bed, ensuring its venomous bite would be delivered in the dead of night with no witness but the walls themselves. This was not a crime of passion. It was a cold, premeditated act of execution disguised as a tragic, mysterious death. When Helen Stoner, surviving her sister, comes to Holmes, she is not just a client. She is a prisoner on death row seeking a last-minute reprieve. The danger she faces is not a potential future threat, but an immediate and crushing reality. The whistle has already sounded for her sister. She knows her turn is next. This immediacy charges the entire case with a palpable tension that is often absent in Holmes's other investigations. This isn't about solving a historical puzzle. It's about preventing a murder that is hours away from happening. Holmes's confrontation with Roylott is therefore one of his most direct and perilous. He and Watson are not merely investigators. They are interlopers in a killer's lair, spending a night in the very room where the previous murder occurred, waiting in the darkness for a weapon they cannot see. The climax is a masterpiece of suspense and poetic justice. As the snake slithers down the bell pull, Holmes, waiting in the darkness, attacks it with his cane, driving it back through the ventilator. The enraged reptile, provoked and confused, turns on the first person it encounters, its master, Dr. Roylott, waiting in the next room. The man who wielded a creature of nature as his weapon is ultimately destroyed by it, his own deadly scheme rebounding upon him with perfect, fatal irony. Dr. Grimesby Roylott remains a uniquely potent villain because his evil is so intimate and his threat so physical. He represents the horror of the domestic sphere turned into a hunting ground, where the person who is supposed to offer protection is the source of the gravest danger. He needed no criminal network. His house was his castle, and his family were his subjects to be ruled and ultimately sacrificed. He was a storm contained within four walls, and his defeat required not just the intellect of Sherlock Holmes, but the courage to step directly into the eye of that storm. Yet for all the physical terror of a Roylott or the grand ambitions of a Clay, some of the most chilling adversaries in Sherlock Holmes's career were those who believed their crimes to be utterly undetectable, their methods so advanced and subtle that they were beyond the reach of justice. This brings us to a villain who represents a terrifyingly modern kind of evil, a killer who weaponized the emerging science of bacteriology and hid behind a mask of concerned friendship. In The Adventure of the Dying Detective, we are introduced to the smug, cunning and profoundly arrogant Culverton Smith, a planter from Sumatra who engineered what he was certain was the perfect, untraceable murder. Culverton Smith's threat is unique because it is born from a perversion of scientific knowledge. He isn't a superstitious user of exotic poisons like Roylott. He is a man who understands the cutting edge of germ theory. His weapon of choice is a rare and virulent disease known as Tapanuli fever, which he contracted during his time in the East. He has cultivated the pathogen, preserving it in a small ivory box, and has devised a method to transmit it using a sharp spring-loaded mechanism hidden inside. This isn't a crime of passion or a simple act of greed. It is a cold, clinical experiment in murder, designed by a man who sees himself as a scientist above the law. He believes he has not simply killed his victim, his nephew Victor Savage, but has performed an act of nature, leaving behind no evidence that any court in the land would recognize. His arrogance is rooted in this certainty. In his mind, he hasn't outsmarted the police. He has rendered them irrelevant. The brilliance of Holmes's plan to ensnare him lies in its psychological perfection. He understands that a man like Smith, so confident in his own intellectual and scientific superiority, would only be vulnerable to his own vanity. Smith would never confess to a detective he could outthink, but he might very well boast to a dying man he pities. Therefore, Holmes stages an elaborate and utterly convincing performance. He retires to his rooms, refusing to let anyone near him, not even a frantic doctor. Watson, who is convinced his dearest friend, is on the brink of death from a contagious and horrific illness. Holmes's transformation is a masterclass in observation and acting. He allows himself to become gaunt and feverish. He refuses all nourishment, and he stages bizarre, delirious ramblings about oysters and coins, all to sell the illusion that his brilliant mind has been completely unseated by the disease. He even goes so far as to forbid Watson from fetching a doctor, knowing that Smith, the one man in London with experience of this specific illness, would be the only logical person to call. The trap is set not with a snare, but with a carefully laid trail of breadcrumbs designed to appeal directly to Smith's ego. When a horrified and desperate Watson finally disobeys orders and seeks out Smith, the villain's reaction is everything Holmes predicted. He is not alarmed, he is intrigued and smugly satisfied. He agrees to come, not out of compassion, but to witness the final, satisfying results of his handiwork, and to revel in his own cleverness with the only audience that matters, his dying victim. He arrives at Baker Street, not as a murderer, but as a conquering hero visiting his masterpiece. The ensuing scene is one of the most tense and brilliantly manipulative in the entire canon. Smith enters the darkened room and sees Holmes, seemingly delirious and moments from death. Believing himself to be in the presence of a broken man, his guard drops completely. He is condescending, almost affectionate, patting Holmes on the shoulder and speaking to him as one would a child. He cannot resist the opportunity to gloat, to finally have someone appreciate the genius of his crime. He leans in close, confirming details, and in a moment of supreme arrogance, he all but confesses everything, believing his words are falling on ears that will carry them to the grave. He is the artist signing his name on the canvas, utterly convinced the painting is about to be destroyed. What Smith fails to comprehend is that the dying man in the bed is the most alert and focused he has ever been. Every rasping breath, every twitch, is part of the performance. Holmes is not the victim, he is the director, the audience, and the final judge. The moment of revelation is breathtaking. At the precise instant Smith finishes his smug monologue, Holmes's voice, suddenly clear and strong, rings out, asking for a match to light a lamp. The illusion shatters. The dying detective springs up, full of vitality, and the murderer finds himself staring not at his triumph, but at his complete and utter defeat. The final masterstroke is the reveal of Inspector Morton, who has been listening from a hidden alcove the entire time, turning Smith's confident confession into admissible evidence. Culver and Smith's downfall was not due to a mistake in his scientific method. It was a catastrophic failure of his own character. His need for recognition, his desire to have his brilliance acknowledged, was the fatal flaw that the world's greatest detective exploited with surgical precision. He was not outsmarted by a superior scientist, but out-psyched by a superior student of human nature. And just when we think we have seen the full spectrum of human villainy, from the grand criminal empires to the intimate domestic terrors, we encounter a case that weaponizes something even more primal and pervasive: the fear of the unknown itself. This brings us to the deeply unsettling affair of the Sussex Vampire. A story that on its surface appears to be a foray into the supernatural, but at its heart reveals one of the most chillingly calculated and emotionally cruel adversaries Holmes ever faced. An adversary who understood that the most potent weapon isn't always a poison or a dagger, but a well-placed superstition. The case arrives at Baker Street, wrapped in the language of Gothic horror. Mr. Robert Ferguson, a tea merchant, writes to Holmes in a state of desperate confusion, fearing his Peruvian wife has been engaging in vampiric rituals. He describes a scene straight from a nightmare. He walked into his wife's nursery to find her bent over the neck of their infant son. And when she looked up, her lips were stained with blood. Compounding this grotesque image is the condition of his older son from a previous marriage. A 15-year-old boy named Jack, who has become weak, listless, and is suffering from mysterious, debilitating attacks. The implication is horrifying and seemingly inexplicable. A mother preying on her own child. The word vampire hangs in the air, a supernatural specter that logic seems powerless to combat. This is the precise challenge this particular villain presents. They are not relying on physical strength or complex criminal logistics. They are exploiting a deep cultural fear. In the rational, scientific world of the late Victorian era, belief in the supernatural was a fading but still potent force, a remnant of a darker, less enlightened time. By crafting a scenario that pointed directly to a vampire, the true culprit was counting on this superstition to short-circuit all rational investigation. The hope was that fear would do the work of obfuscation. that the shocking imagery would be so powerful, it would prevent anyone from looking for a simpler, more terrestrial explanation. It was a psychological smokescreen of the most effective kind, designed to paralyze the intellect with terror. Holmes, of course, is the one man in England immune to such hysterics. He immediately dismisses the vampire theory, not out of arrogance, but because it violates his fundamental principle. Once you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. A supernatural creature is an impossible variable in his equation. Therefore, the blood, the weakness, the attacks, they must all have a human cause. His investigation quickly peels back the layers of the supernatural facade to reveal a far more common, yet in this context, even more monstrous crime: a deliberate and sustained poisoning. The baby had a small cut on its neck that the mother, Dolores, was caught sucking to clean the wound, a traditional folk remedy from her native Peru. The real victim was the older boy, Jack, who was being slowly poisoned with a rare South American arrow toxin. The revelation of the villain is where the case transcends a simple mystery and becomes a profound study in malice. The poisoner is not the exotic foreign wife, but the boy's own nursemaid, a woman whose motive was a twisted, jealous devotion to the first wife and her son, Jack. She saw the new wife and her baby as interlopers, a threat to the memory of her former mistress and to the inheritance of the boy she cared for. Her plan was breathtaking in its cruelty. She was slowly murdering Jack with the poison, but she was doing it in a way designed to frame the new wife for the crime. The staged vampire scene was the masterstroke, a piece of theatrical horror intended to provide a supernatural explanation for the physical effects of the poison she was administering. She hoped that the mother would be accused of monstrosity and imprisoned or worse, leaving the field clear for her and her preferred heir. This makes the nursemaid a uniquely vile kind of adversary. She is a psychological terrorist. She wasn't just poisoning a child. She was torturing an entire family, manipulating their deepest fears and cultural prejudices to turn them against each other. She used the mother's foreignness and different customs as a weapon against her, knowing that a traditional Peruvian remedy would look like a savage ritual to English eyes. She preyed on uncertainty and suspicion, counting on the fact that a frightened man would believe a vampire story before he would believe his own wife. Her evil was intimate, patient, and deeply personal, all hidden behind a mask of loyal service. In the end, Holmes's victory is not marked by an arrest or a dramatic confrontation, but by the restoration of truth and the healing of a family torn apart by manufactured fear. He exposes the nursemaid's plot, reveals the poison, and clears the innocent mother's name. The villain of the Sussex Vampire stands as a stark reminder that the most dangerous monsters are not those that lurk in the shadows of folklore, but those who wear a familiar face and know exactly which fears to trigger to achieve their wicked end. She didn't need fangs. She had a bottle of poison and a profound understanding of human weakness. But what happens when the adversary is not a single brilliant mind or even a small group of conspirators, but a vast, hydra-headed organization whose members are faceless and whose reach spans an ocean? This is the chilling reality Holmes faces in The 5 Orange Pips, a case that pits the world's foremost logician against an enemy he can scarcely comprehend: the impersonal, relentless terror of a secret society, specifically the Ku Klux Klan. Here, the villain is not a man but a movement, an ideology of hatred given form, and it presents a challenge unlike any other in the canon, one that pushes Holmes's methods to their absolute limit and forces him to confront the unsettling truth that some evils are too diffuse, too systemic, for any one detective to defeat. The terror of the Ku Klux Klan, as depicted in this story, is its faceless, bureaucratic nature. The threat does not arrive with a dramatic pronouncement or a personal vendetta. It is delivered through the mail in the form of 5 dried orange pips, followed by the initials KKK. This is not a taunt. It is a death sentence, a piece of impersonal corporate correspondence from a society that treats murder as a matter of administrative procedure. The victims, first Elias Openshaw, then his brother Joseph, and finally his son John, are not pursued by a mustache-twirling villain. They are simply processed, eliminated according to the cold, inhuman logic of the clan's brand of justice. There is no grand confrontation, no opportunity for Holmes to match wits with a mastermind. The adversary is a ghost, a concept, a set of rules enforced by an army of anonymous men. This impersonal quality makes the threat uniquely terrifying because it cannot be reasoned with, bribed, or intimidated. It is a machine, and once set in motion, it simply carries out its function. This case forces Holmes into a role he is deeply uncomfortable with, that of a historian and a political analyst, rather than a detective of immediate, physical clues. His investigation is not about following a footprint or analyzing tobacco ash. It is about unraveling a historical thread that leads from the Reconstruction-era American South to a quiet English country house. He must understand the context of the clan's reign of terror. The nature of the secrets Colonel Openshaw might have brought back with him from his time in America, and the long, vengeful memory of an organization that holds grudges across decades and continents. Holmes is, for once, dealing with a cultural and historical evil, a vendetta born from a specific time and place, whose rules are foreign to the orderly, rational world of London. His deductive genius must be applied to the dusty pages of history books, and the frightened testimony of a client who only understands that he is doomed by a power he cannot see or name. The most profound and tragic aspect of this story is that it represents one of Sherlock Holmes's most unambiguous failures. He deduces the entire history of the threat with his usual breathtaking speed. He identifies the clan, understands the significance of the pips and the letters, and even correctly predicts the method of the next murder. He pieces together the puzzle perfectly. But his brilliance is ultimately useless. By the time John Openshaw leaves Baker Street with Holmes's advice to show the threatening letter to the police, it is already too late. The impersonal machinery of the clan has already outpaced him. Openshaw is found dead in the Thames that very night, and the case is closed not with an arrest, but with a bleak newspaper clipping reporting the drowning. Holmes's only victory is one of knowledge, not justice. He knows who is responsible, but the perpetrators are an ocean away, protected by anonymity and distance. He can only express a cold fury, vowing to spend his life hunting down the organization, a promise that highlights his powerlessness against such a diffuse enemy. In this way, the Ku Klux Klan stands as a unique and profoundly unsettling adversary. It is evil systematized and scaled, a reminder that the greatest threats to order are not always singular criminals, but ideologies that empower countless individuals to act with collective impunity. The clan is a shadow that Holmes cannot illuminate, a puzzle with no single solution. The 5 orange pips remains a haunting entry in the canon precisely because it breaks the formula. It suggests that even the world's greatest detective is ultimately a single man, and some darknesses are so vast and deeply rooted that they can only be understood, not undone. Yet the legacy of these classic rivalries did not end with the final page, penned by Arthur Conan Doyle. It found new life and radical reinterpretation on screens, both large and small, as modern storytellers began to dissect the essence of this adversarial dynamic, asking a compelling new question: who would be the ultimate foe for a Sherlock Holmes of the 21st century? This creative endeavor has produced a fascinating spectrum of antagonists, each reframing the core conflict through a contemporary lens, and in the process, revealing what our own era fears most in a villain. The most iconic of these modern reimaginings is, without a doubt, the Jim Moriarty brought to terrifying life by Andrew Scott in the BBC's series Sherlock. This version is a seismic shift from the original. Gone is the elderly, calculating professor. In his place is a chaotic, unpredictable force of nature who wears the skin of a playful trickster. This Moriarty is not a spider at the center of a web. He is the hand that reaches in and shakes the entire terrarium. His genius is not in meticulous organization, but in explosive, theatrical anarchy. He doesn't just want to defeat Sherlock. He wants to break him, to prove that his own nihilistic worldview is the ultimate truth. Their conflict is a dizzying game of psychological warfare, played out across the London skyline and the digital landscape, making him a perfect nemesis for a Holmes who is himself a high-functioning sociopath navigating the modern world. Scott's performance, all manic glee and chilling stillness, redefines the rivalry as a twisted, intimate dance between two sides of the same unstable coin, capturing the contemporary anxiety of a world where chaos can be orchestrated by a single, brilliant individual with a smartphone. But not every modern adversary seeks to be a dark reflection. Some are crafted as classic foils, designed to test Holmes in more traditional, yet still potent, ways. The 2009 film Sherlock Holmes, directed by Guy Ritchie and starring Robert Downey Jr., introduced Lord Blackwood, a seemingly supernatural threat who emerges from the fog of Victorian occultism. Blackwood is a magnificent period piece villain, a megalomaniacal aristocrat who uses a facade of black magic and ancient rituals to terrorize London and seize political power. His effectiveness lies in his manipulation of superstition and fear, weaponizing the era's fascination with the esoteric to create a villain who appears, for a time, to be genuinely beyond Holmes's rational comprehension. He forces this more physical, brawler version of Holmes to confront not just a man, but an idea, the very superstition his entire philosophy is built to dismantle. Blackwood serves as a powerful reminder that the ultimate adversary can also be the ultimate test of the hero's core principle, pushing him to reaffirm his faith in logic in the face of seemingly impossible darkness. Other adaptations have taken the concept even further, exploring adversaries that are not individuals at all, but systems or even facets of Holmes's own psychology. The television series Elementary presented a compelling long-term arc with Moriarty being revealed as Jamie Moriarty, a criminal mastermind who also happened to be Sherlock's former lover and intellectual equal, adding profound layers of personal betrayal and complex emotion to their rivalry. Meanwhile, the Russian series Sherlock Holmes envisioned a nemesis for a younger, more vulnerable Holmes in the form of a cruel mathematics professor, who served as a dark mentor figure. And perhaps most intriguingly, the video game Sherlock Holmes. Chapter 1 explores an internal adversary, suggesting that the detective's greatest struggle in his youth was with the grief and guilt he projected onto a fictional version of his childhood friend, who taunts him as a manifestation of his own trauma. These varied interpretations demonstrate that the search for Sherlock Holmes's greatest adversary is a conversation that continues to evolve. Each generation, it seems, molds a nemesis in its own image, whether it be the chaotic terrorist, the manipulative cult leader, the systemic corrupter, or the personal demon, proving that the empty chair opposite the world's only consulting detective will always be filled by whatever darkness we understand best. Yet for all the external monsters and criminal masterminds, The most relentless and insidious adversary Sherlock Holmes ever faced was one he could never truly arrest or outrun. It resided within the confines of 221B Baker Street, and indeed within the very confines of his own skull. We have chronicled his battles against the Napoleon of Crime, the woman who outwitted him, and the blackmailers who exploited human weakness. But perhaps his most profound and constant struggle was against the terrifying potential of his own magnificent mind to turn inward and consume itself. This was not a foe he could deduce or trap. It was a shadow he had to live with, a psychological landscape of profound highs and devastating lows that he managed not with perfect success, but with a weary, relentless effort. The most visible symptom of this internal war was his reliance on cocaine, a habit he turned to not for recreation, but as a desperate medical intervention for a specific and debilitating condition: a soul-crushing, pervasive boredom. When the world failed to provide a puzzle worthy of his intellect, his mental engine, built for immense speed and complexity, would idle dangerously. Without a compelling case to engage his every faculty, his thoughts would turn inward, leading to what Dr. Watson describes as the black moods, or the dull reaction, that follows periods of intense exertion. In these states, Holmes would lie for days on the sofa, lethargic and listless, his violin silent and his remarkable energy utterly depleted. This was not mere laziness. It was a profound depressive state, a neurological crash after the incredible high of intellectual pursuit. The cocaine, a 7% solution he injected with a precision that mirrored his detective work, was his flawed and dangerous method of starting his own consciousness, of artificially creating the stimulation his brain craved to escape the oppressive weight of nothingness. It was a way to fight an enemy with no face, the enemy of stillness. This internal dynamic reveals a tragic paradox at the heart of Sherlock Holmes. His greatest gift is also the source of his greatest vulnerability. A mind that can reconstruct a life from the twist of a watch chain, or foresee a criminal's actions 10 moves in advance, is not a mind built for the mundane rhythms of everyday life. It is a high-performance instrument, and when deprived of its intended purpose, it malfunctions. The world, for all its crime and mystery, could not consistently produce challenges that matched his capacity. The gaps between cases were not vacations. They were a form of psychological torture, a sensory deprivation that left him raw and desperate. His boredom was not a trivial affliction of the privileged. It was the agonizing experience of a genius trapped in a world that too often moved in slow motion, a race car forced to idle in city traffic. Watson, in his role as friend and chronicler, becomes more than just a biographer in these moments. He becomes a lifeline. He is the anchor to a normalcy Holmes can never fully inhabit, but desperately need. Watson's steady, compassionate presence, his concern over the cocaine bottle, his efforts to draw Holmes into conversation or a meal, these are not nagging interruptions. They are the gentle, persistent attempts of a good man to pull his friend back from the abyss of his own mind. Holmes often scoffs at this sentimentality, but he consistently allows it. He accepts the invitations to the theater, he tolerates the worry, and he even on occasion admits to the value of Watson's companionship. This suggests a deep, unspoken awareness of his own fragility. He knows the detective is vulnerable to the man, and he allows the man to be protected by the doctor. In this light, his famous coldness and emotional detachment can be seen not just as personality traits, but as necessary survival mechanisms. To engage fully with the emotional weight of every tragic case, the broken families, the ruined lives, the victims of cruelty, would be to invite a paralyzing despair. His focus on the game is a psychological shield. By reducing the most horrific crimes to intellectual puzzles, he protects his own sanity. He can analyze the mud on a boot without being overwhelmed by the grief of the widow it belongs to. This isn't a lack of humanity. It's a profound and practiced method of emotional regulation for a mind that feels everything too intensely and must channel that intensity into a manageable form: logic. His greatest internal adversary, therefore, is not a lack of feeling, but the terrifying potential for too much of it. Ultimately, this endless internal conflict is what makes Sherlock Holmes one of fiction's most enduring and human characters. We see our own struggles reflected in his, albeit on a grander scale. We understand the restlessness of an unchallenged mind, the despair of boredom, the appeal of a quick fix for a lingering sadness, and the battle to maintain equilibrium in a chaotic world. His victories over the Moriartys and Grunas of the world are thrilling, but his daily victories over the darkness within are arguably more heroic. They are quiet, uncelebrated, and ongoing. He is his own greatest adversary because he is the only one who can truly understand the complexity of the battlefield. And he is his own greatest hero because he never, despite the cost, stops fighting. Yet even as he contended with his own internal demons, and the INSTITUTIONIL, Chinese letter of Scotland Yard, Sherlock Holmes often found himself battling an adversary far more diffuse and unpredictable than any single criminal mind: the court of public opinion, a force shaped and amplified by the burgeoning power of the Victorian press. In an age where newspapers were the primary source of information for the masses, the line between fact and sensationalism was often perilously thin, and Holmes's work, which so often relied on secrecy and misdirection, was constantly at risk of being undone by a careless headline or a reporter's ambitious fabrication. This was not a foe he could confront in a drawing room or corner on a foggy street. It was an echo chamber of whispers and printed ink that could legitimize a lie, destroy an innocent reputation, or alert a cunning criminal with the morning edition. The case of the Bruce Partington plans offers a perfect window into this particular struggle. The plot revolves around the theft of supremely sensitive submarine blueprints, a matter of vital national security. Holmes is called upon by his brother Mycroft, a clear indication that the stakes could not be higher. From the outset, the pressure is immense, but it is compounded by the looming presence of the press. The initial death of the clerk, Arthur Conan West, is immediately sensationalized. The newspapers, hungry for a dramatic story, are all too quick to fabricate a narrative of a passionate suicide or a sordid romance gone wrong, completely oblivious to the true, grave nature of the espionage at play. This public misdirection acts as a smokescreen, hindering the official investigation and forcing Holmes to work against not only the foreign agents, but also the popular, misguided narrative circulating in every coffee house and parlor in London. He isn't just solving a crime. He is racing to correct a widespread and dangerous public misconception before it irrevocably damages the investigation. This dynamic reveals a profound tension between Holmes's methods and the appetite of the media. His process is one of meticulous, quiet observation. He depends on the element of surprise, on the ability to move unseen and manipulate his opponents without their knowledge. A shouting press corps, speculating wildly on his every move, fundamentally undermines this approach. In many stories, we see him express open contempt for journalists, whom he views as purveyors of trivialities and impediments to true justice. He understands that their goal is not truth, but circulation, a motive that is often directly at odds with his own. A reporter might happily spook a suspect with a premature story to get a dramatic reaction, completely oblivious to the fact that they are destroying weeks of careful surveillance. The press, in its quest for a scoop, could become an unwitting accomplice to the very criminals it claimed to be exposing. Beyond complicating active investigations, the press also wielded the power to shape Holmes's own public persona, often to his chagrin. Dr. Watson's stories, published in the Strand magazine, are a double-edged sword. On one hand, they bring Holmes a stream of clients and a certain degree of celebrity that he occasionally finds useful. On the other, they create a public image of him as a near-magical figure, a perception that could be a significant hindrance. Clients might arrive with preconceived notions, omitting crucial details because they assume he already knows them through some miraculous means. More dangerously, his enemies could study his methods in print, learning from the published accounts of his past successes. Holmes occasionally admonishes Watson for romanticizing his techniques, understanding that the magician loses his power once the audience knows how the trick is performed. The press, therefore, didn't just report on his work. It actively participated in crafting the legend, a process over which Holmes had only partial control, and which often felt like dealing with a friendly, yet sometimes troublesome, adversary. Perhaps the most pernicious effect of this public court was its power to try and convict without evidence, to destroy lives based on innuendo and speculation. In a society where reputation was a form of social currency, a negative story could be a death sentence. We see this in cases like The Adventure of the Three Students, where the mere hint of scandal involving a university examination could end a promising academic career before any real evidence is presented. Holmes often operates as a corrector of these invisible injustices, his rational conclusions serving to clear names that have been prematurely and publicly sullied. He restores order not just to the legal record, but to the social one, understanding that the court of public opinion, though it has no gavel or jury, can deliver a verdict that is just as devastating as any judge's sentence. In this endless battle against misinformation and sensationalism, Sherlock Holmes wasn't just a detective. He was a bulwark against the tide of gossip, a champion of truth in a world increasingly crowded with distracting, dangerous noise. So we stand at the precipice of our own Reichenbach Falls, staring into the mist of this grand debate. We have navigated the criminal underworld of Moriarty, been outmaneuvered by the brilliance of Adler, felt the visceral terror of Stapleton's Hound, and been repulsed by the legalized evil of Milverton. Each has made a powerful claim to the title, but to crown a champion, we must return to our original scale of justice, the criteria we established at the very beginning. This isn't about picking a favorite villain. It's a forensic exercise in measuring impact against a definitive benchmark. First, the intellectual challenge, the pure, unadulterated clash of minds. On this scale, two figures stand as titans. Professor Moriarty's intellect is presented to us as a theorem, a proven fact of his criminal genius, an equal force to Holmes's own that operates on a vast, organizational scale. It is immense, but it is largely reported, a legend we are told to accept. Irene Adler's intellect, however, is demonstrated to us in real time. We watch her not just match Holmes, but surpass him in the specific arena of human psychology and foresight. She anticipates his every move because she understands the man behind the method. Moriarty represents a grand, abstract intellectual threat. Adler delivers a precise, tactical intellectual defeat. For sheer, proven-on-page outmaneuvering, Adler arguably takes the point, though Moriarty's implied strategic brilliance cannot be dismissed. Next, the depth of personal threat. This is where the contenders diverge dramatically. Moriarty presents the ultimate professional and existential threat. He is the only adversary who successfully engineers a scenario that appears to end Holmes's life, threatening everything the detective represents. Stapleton weaves a deeply personal terror, targeting Holmes's client in their own home with a weaponized nightmare, aiming for the heart of the Baskerville lineage. Milverton, however, poses a different kind of personal threat, one to Holmes's moral code. He forces the detective into outright criminality, making him break the very laws he is sworn to uphold. Each threatens a different facet of Holmes's being. Moriarty his life, Stapleton his client's safety, and Milverton his soul. But for a threat that is both deeply personal and professional, Moriarty's successful campaign of vengeance remains the benchmark. Then we have the crucial criterion of moral complexity. A simple monster is rarely a compelling rival. Milverton is reprehensible, but his evil is straightforward greed and cruelty. Stapleton is a greedy, vengeful murderer hiding behind a legend. Moriarty is pure, ambitious criminality. But Irene Adler, she operates in a glorious shade of grey. Her actions are not evil. They are acts of self-preservation and independence. She outsmarts a king and a detective, not for wealth or power, but for freedom and security. She forces Holmes and us to question who the real villain of her story is. She introduces a moral ambiguity that the others lack, making her victory not just clever, but in many ways deserved. This complexity elevates her from a simple antagonist to a truly multifaceted character. Finally, we must consider lasting impact and cultural legacy. Moriarty's impact is seismic within the narrative. His existence leads to the Great Hiatus, the apparent death of Sherlock Holmes, an event so profound it shocked the world. His cultural legacy is unquestionable. He is the archetype of the criminal mastermind. Adler's impact is more intimate, but no less permanent, forever altering Holmes's perception of women and earning a title of respect no one else possesses. Her cultural legacy is immense, becoming an icon of feminist ingenuity. Stapleton's impact is confined to a single, albeit iconic, case, and Milverton's to a story that showcases Holmes's moral flexibility. In terms of shaking the foundations of the Holmes universe, Moriarty's impact is unparalleled. But in terms of leaving a permanent, personal mark on the detective's character, Adler's is uniquely profound. The scales are trembling, the weights are nearly balanced. We have one figure who represents the ultimate professional nemesis, a shadowy architect of chaos. And we have another who represents the ultimate personal and intellectual challenge, a singular mind who achieved a perfect victory. The evidence is compelling on both sides, pointing toward a final confrontation not between good and evil, but between two very different, yet equally valid, definitions of what it means to be the greatest adversary. The tension is unbearable, the verdict agonizingly close, but a champion must be named. And so we arrive at the final deduction, the moment to synthesize every observation, every clue, every argument laid out before us. The evidence is all present, the logic is clear, and the verdict is inescapable. While Moriarty's shadow looms large as the archetypal arch nemesis, while Stapleton crafted a masterpiece of Gothic terror, and while Milverton repulsed us with his legalized evil, none of them achieved what one individual managed in a single, flawless encounter. The greatest adversary to ever face Sherlock Holmes, the one who truly deserves the title, is not the Napoleon of crime, but the woman who became the one Irene Adler. This is not a dismissal of Moriarty's formidable power. He is, and will always be, the official nemesis, the symbol of organized evil that perfectly counterbalances Holmes's role as the agent of order. Their rivalry is the stuff of epic myth, a clash of titans that shook the very foundations of London. But epic scale alone does not equate to personal greatness. Moriarty's threat, for all its grandeur, was abstract. told to us more than shown. His genius was a reported statistic, his empire an implied network. He was a magnificent plot device, a deus ex machina of villainy designed to provide a worthy exit. But he lacked the intimate, personal depth that transforms a villain from a professional obstacle into a profound personal challenge. Irene Adler, by contrast, delivered a victory that was not only complete but surgical in its precision. She didn't just outsmart Holmes in a moment. She outmaneuvered his entire methodology. Holmes's process was a machine of deduction, a relentless engine that crushed mysteries by reducing them to observable facts. Adler understood that the machine's greatest weakness was its operator. She didn't attack the logic, she anticipated the logician. She studied the artist and thus predicted the brushstrokes. While Holmes was meticulously staging his theatrical performance with fake fights and cries of fire, Adler was backstage, watching the director and smiling, already knowing the entire script. Her triumph was a work of psychological art. Furthermore, her victory was moral. Moriarty represented everything Holmes fought against, pure, acquisitive evil. Adler represented a complication. She was not a villain. She was a person fighting for her autonomy against the oppressive power of a corrupt king. Holmes, for once in his career, found himself on the wrong side of a moral equation, working for a privileged, panicked monarch to silence a woman protecting herself from scandal. Adler's cause was just, and her methods, while deceptive, were ultimately defensive. This adds a layer of profound richness to their duel. She wasn't just a criminal to be caught, she was a wrong to be righted, and she had to right it herself, against the very man hired to stop her. She forced Holmes to work for a bad client, and then showed him what true integrity looked like. The lasting impact of this single encounter is what cements her status. Moriarty's impact was cataclysmic, but finite. It led to a fall and a return. Adler's impact was eternal, a permanent scar on Holmes's perception of his own infallibility. He didn't just remember her, he enshrined her. The phrase, "the woman," is not a term of endearment. It is a title of ultimate respect, a unique classification in his meticulously ordered mind. She became the standard against which he measured all other intelligence, a constant reminder that logic could be defeated by a deeper understanding of the human heart. She changed him. A true adversary doesn't just challenge the hero, they improve them, they force them to grow. Moriarty made Holmes a legend by seemingly killing him. Irene Adler made Holmes a better detective by proving him wrong. Therefore, the crown does not go to the man who created a criminal empire, but to the woman who defended her own sovereignty. It goes not to the professor who threatened Holmes's life, but to the contralto who challenged his worldview. The greatest adversary is not the one who poses the largest threat, but the one who delivers the most perfect defeat. And in the entire canon of Sherlock Holmes, there is only one perfect defeat, one clean, absolute victory that left the master not enraged, not vengeful, but genuinely, respectfully impressed. For outthinking the world's only consulting detective, for doing it with grace, and for leaving an indelible mark on his soul, Irene Adler stands alone. She is, and will always be, the woman who beat Sherlock Holmes. And so our journey through the gaslit alleyways and shadowy drawing rooms of Sherlock Holmes's world comes to a close. We have stood alongside the great detective as he faced down a gallery of rogues unlike any other in literature. From the calculated empire of Moriarty to the intimate cruelty of Grimesby Roylott, from the psychological warfare of Irene Adler to the systemic terror of the Ku Klux Klan. Each adversary, in their own unique way, held up a dark mirror to Holmes himself, reflecting not just his intellect, but his flaws, his obsessions, and the very core of his being. Moriarty showed us the danger of a mind like Holmes's turned to evil. Adler revealed the limits of pure logic when faced with human cunning. Milverton forced a confrontation with the law's own inadequacies, and the grief-stricken villains reminded us that even the most coldly rational detective could not always escape the pull of human emotion. This incredible variety of foes is precisely what gives these stories their enduring, timeless power. It's not just about the puzzle, it's about the people in it. The antagonists are never mere obstacles. They are fully realized characters with motivations that range from the tragically understandable to the utterly monstrous. They challenge Holmes on every conceivable level intellectually, physically, morally, and psychologically. This rich tapestry of conflict ensures that the stories never feel repetitive. A reader never knows if the next case will be a battle of wits with a criminal genius, a race against a ruthless assassin, or a desperate struggle against a seemingly supernatural force. This constant innovation and depth are why, over a century later, we still return to Baker Street. We are not just watching a detective solve crimes. We are witnessing a brilliant mind engage in the eternal struggle between order and chaos, between justice and vengeance, between the cold light of reason and the warm, complicated mess of human nature. But the conversation doesn't end here. The debate over Sherlock Holmes's greatest adversary is one that has fueled discussions in drawing rooms and online forums for generations. And yours is just as valuable. We've presented the evidence, weighed the criteria, and made our case, but the jury is still out. Was it the strategic mastermind, the personal conqueror, or the psychological manipulator who truly deserves the title? Now we want to hear your verdict. Scroll down and let us know in the comments, who do you believe stands as Sherlock Holmes's ultimate nemesis, and why? Your perspective is the final piece of this great deduction. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the world of Sherlock Holmes and his formidable foes, there's plenty more mystery to uncover. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next investigation. We're always delving into the secrets of classic literature, unraveling historical enigmas, and exploring the greatest stories ever told. Until next time, the game is forever afoot.